actually as a direct consequence of the poverty programs. And these are only some of the federal programs that are violating our Constitution, concentrating vast powers in government's hands, and bankrupting this nation. Most of our political leaders have no intention of putting an end to these agencies, bureaus, and departments. They would be perfectly happy to see constitutional limitations on their assumed powers removed for good. They care little about freedom, but a great deal about directing our lives, spending our earnings, and transferring our nation's sovereignty, all of which means that the job of protecting America is up to her people. Rather than standing by and watching the celebration of our Constitution's 200th anniversary become the occasion for weakening and even destroying its limitations on government power, Americans ought to set a goal of restoring the clear intention of its framers, the restriction of government to only those powers specifically granted in its pages. And rather than defer to internationalists who want to destroy our nation's independence with treaties, Americans should demand that our nation withdraw from the United Nations and all of its subsidiaries. Our presence in these sovereignty-compromising associations costs us greatly in dollars, but even more in the ability to function as a free and independent nation. Our goal as Americans should be full restoration of the Constitution by the year 2000. Let's end the entangling alliances that George Washington warned about in his farewell address. Let's roll back the unconstitutional powers and abolish the unconstitutional agencies that are destroying America. Something else threatens the American system. There is no need for a constitutional convention. There is a need instead for citizen awareness that will force elected and appointed officials to abide fully by their oaths to support and defend the Constitution we already have. In fact, a constitutional convention has always been looked upon as a dangerous vehicle that could lead to great harm. Even though Article 5 of the Constitution allows for the creation of such a convention, there has never been one during the 200 years of the Constitution's existence. The reason? The Constitutional Convention of 1787, that was called for the purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation, exceeded its mandate and abolished what it was merely supposed to revise. Out of that convention came our present Constitution. But ever since 1787, there has been a judicious reluctance to give any new constitutional convention the opportunity to destroy what we were fortunate enough to get in 1787. Hence, amendments have always been added through the other prescribed method, the one that calls for approval by 2/3 of each House of Congress and then ratification by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states. A constitutional convention is a Pandora's box that Americans for 200 years have avoided opening. The simple truth is that the Constitution does not need any of the amendments offered by the Committee on the Constitutional System. What it needs instead is adherence. The only change that would improve the Constitution is a few amendments to remove several existing amendments that cling like huge barnacles to our ship of state. One especially harmful example is the 1913 amendment calling for the income tax championed by Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto. Get rid of the income tax? Yes, indeed. If the federal government could finance its needs prior to 1913 without an income tax, it obviously had other means of raising needed revenue. And if it could function then without the federal government in everyone's pocket, it can do so now. The problem is that government has exceeded its boundaries, and it has broken many of the chains imposed on it by the Constitution. That its cost has grown enormously should come as no surprise. America is at a crossroads. Interest in the Constitution, spurred by the celebration of its 200th anniversary, should lead many Americans to an awareness that its value lies chiefly in its restriction on the power of government. Such an understanding, if widespread enough, will return our nation to the road marked freedom, productivity, and independence. But as we have shown, there are powerful forces at work, plotting to enlarge already deep cracks in the constitutional wall our founding fathers gave us. They are determined to keep Americans from understanding the magnificent system given us 200 years ago. And they plan to expand government's power in response to problems they and like-minded liberals and internationalists created in the first place. The road that these individuals would take us down is labeled big government, interdependence, and tyranny. Yes, our nation has come to a crossroads. Which way we shall turn shall ultimately be decided by the people who live in this greatest of all nations. It is time for Americans who love liberty to choose the road marked freedom. Commit some of your time, energy, and resources to reawakening fellow Americans to their marvelous heritage, as well as to the threat facing it. The men who gave us America deserve to be repaid by your effort today. And the children of today, as well as those of a million tomorrows, are relying on us to keep government chained and freedom flourishing. Whether or not America keeps faith with its magnificent past is up to you. You know how fortunate we are to be Americans, and you know that powerful and determined individuals who support the already huge growth of our federal government now want to carve large holes in our nation's Constitution. They can be stopped, and they must be stopped, or our children and grandchildren will remember us not for what we passed on to them, but for our failure to keep faith with the men who pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for a free and independent United States of America. It will take effort and organization on the part of many determined Americans, and the time for it is now. In 1776, when the moment of truth came, when the pen was readied for the signing of the Declaration of Independence, doubt and fear flashed through the minds of several of the 56 men who had gathered in Philadelphia's Independence Hall. Maybe it was too bold a move, or too soon to take it. Maybe negotiation was the better course. Were conditions really so terrible to merit such an action as to defy the king and his armies? John Adams took the floor to speak his sentiments. He talked of the possibility of ignominious death and slavery, and of not even living to see what fruits independence might bring. But he said, "Be it so, be it so. If it be the pleasure of heaven that my country shall require the poor offering of my life, the victim shall be ready. But while I do live, let me have a country, or at least the hope of a country, and that a free country. But whatever may be our fate, be assured this declaration will stand. It may cost treasure and it may cost blood, but it will stand, and it will richly compensate for both. And live or die, survive or perish, I am for the declaration. It is my living sentiment, and by the blessing of God it shall be my dying sentiment. Independence now and independence forever." All 56 men signed. And mankind's most admirable and successful experiment in human freedom was launched. Our forebears fought a costly war to keep it going. Then they built a constitution which created the greatest governmental system ever conceived by men. We should honor them by understanding and protecting the marvelous constitution they gave us. If we value freedom, our course is clear. It is time for another round of courage, another surge of wisdom, another dedication to freedom. It is time to keep faith with America.